And before I fill in that background color, I'm going to just clean off these smaller brushes just with the odorless mineral spirits and the paper towel. And this is my favorite paper towel. It's Viva, V-I-V-A, the one that says like cloth or cloth-like. I'm just going to set them off to the side. Now I'm going to get the background brush, and let's just see here. It's just a lot of fun. I don't know, just the physical application of the paint is something that I really enjoy. So the ivory black, let's go ahead and remix this but lighter. So ivory black, titanium white, so now it's lighter. Well, it was. So now the titanium white. Let's just throw in a little swap of flesh tone, just to add some nuance to that color. And the Alizarin Crimson Permanent. There we go. That's the values that I want. And at the same time, I'm going to go over, I'm going to let the shapes just kind of caress one another, just to get a softer edge. Let's get you a close-up so you can see exactly what I'm doing. So I'm going to let these shapes just kind of meet one another, see this? And that automatically creates a softer edge. And this is definitely an area in the painting where I want a much softer edge. Let's just let all these shapes touch one another. Don't know why that isn't covering. What's going on here? Alright, so I just want these shapes to lightly, just very lightly caress. And that's how you get a very, very soft edge in alla prima. Let's just do the same kind of thing up here with the ear, but we don't want the shape, the edge to be the same all throughout, so I don't know. Let's sharpen this one a little bit, but not too much, so it's a very subtle edge. It's a little bit sharper than this. This is a little bit softer than this, so basically sharp, not too sharp, not sharp at all, and then kind of in the middle. That's how I kind of vary the edges. Let's just cover all this stuff now. Now remember those brushes that we cleaned off before? So the odorless mineral spirits should have dried off at least a little bit, right? So what I'm going to do is, on the palette, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to re-establish this very simple gradation of flesh tone, but I'm going to keep it kind of, well, you'll see what I mean. Let's just follow along with my brush as I'm adjusting this gradation of flesh tone. So I'm going to want a very clean gradation of flesh tone all across there. But I'm also going to want kind of a warmer gradation of flesh tone. So let's just do it this way. So with just the Alizarin Permanent in this shape here, I'm just going to move up and up and up and up and up and up until it gets really light. And that ought to be about it for that. So I'm going to go back and forth now between these darker and lighter brushes, and I'm going to start to pick and choose areas that I want to basically just make more realistic. So here I'm going to start off with the eyes. So it's going to be a little bit lighter here, and don't worry, I mixed this little gradation of flesh tone just so I can spend more time in close-up shots, so you don't have to see footage of me continuously having to remix a certain value. And I guess it's a good thing that the brushes are pretty used up, so I don't really have the option of getting into like really, really small shapes just yet. I'll probably break out the really tiny shapes, tiny brushes for the super tiny shapes later. But for now, we're really trying to sculpt out these forms. So for instance, this edge here. It's just going to be a little bit darker. It's a little bit more of that warm color that we mixed up on the side of the palette. We're going to kind of create an in-between plane between the side of the nose here and then the maxilla, this region of the face. It could also be the shape of the eyes that's bothering me. Now again, the eyes on the painting. That needed to be a little bit more flat. Yeah, I don't think these brushes are gonna do. I'm gonna have to switch to smaller brushes at some point. But for now, I'm gonna see how much I can do with just these brushes. So I've read a lot in some of the comments that folks really struggle with eyes. I definitely get eyes a lot. You know, whenever I ask, what does everyone struggle with? And again, if you really struggle with a particular aspect in the portrait, just go ahead and comment down below. Do you struggle with eyes a lot as well? I also got nose. A lot of folks struggle with nose. For me, it just tends to be the mandible the most, but you know, I think I'm just going to be struggling a lot with the eyes right now. So if you struggle with eyes, I understand. I'm struggling with these eyes right now. And the important thing to do is to stand back. Whenever you're struggling with something, just stand back. You need to get some perspective. It's always important to have perspective on the area of which you're struggling. Again, I'm basically just kind of taking right off the palette, trying to minimize the amount of mixing that I do. And this is definitely going to be the story of how, 5,000 brush strokes. It took 5,000 brush strokes to get the right 5 to read. I'm just trying to get more form in the shape of the eye socket. See how that's turning away. Then it's just picking up a little bit of light here. And of course all into here. It's getting a little darker. Same thing is going to happen all over here. So this is the kind of stuff that I would usually cut out in my my older portrait painting tutorials, or even some of my more recent paintings. It's only now that I'm really starting to put in all of the footage. I think this is only the third painting that I've done recently where you see all the footage. And of course I've done some paintings in the past where I showed you all the footage, but I think those paintings were only about an hour or so. A little bit less refined. So again, you're really going to see every single brush stroke. Just trying to build up the light. It's actually to my advantage that my brushes are kind of beat up. Just because they're not allowing me to make a very kind of careful mark. So I'm just putting Alizarin permanent into something that's dark on the palette. Just to get that little dark accent. My goodness, the brush stroke is as wide as the shape that I want to apply, so yeah, I'm definitely pushing the limits of what I can do with these brushes. We're definitely pushing the limits of our materials here. So more Alizarin permanent. To be honest, right now I'm just trying to get the shape. Basically this shape here. Because I know that if I can get that shape to read in the relative correct position, then I should be in a good place. It takes time and many, many brush strokes to get it to read the way I want it to read. Gonna revisit that shadow color that we had before. So put it right into this shape here. This definitely is a part of the painting where I'm going to be very, very quiet. Just going to push this dark underneath the lower eyelid a little more. I'm going to have to compare these edges to one another. So for instance, this one looks like it needs to go up a little more, giving a more distinctive look to the glabella, this shape here. Alright, so we're out of close-up now, just so you can see the paint mixtures. So again, still working on these shapes. Goes up a little bit more. This one goes up as well. It's a softer edge over here. So while we're at it, let's go ahead and put in some more of the background. Because again, I might be focusing way too much into one shape for too long, so it's just a good idea to fill in more of the background and then start to consider if I want to put in, which I probably do, some shapes down here, and then we can continue to build in more specificity onto the features of the face. But it's just a good idea to not stay put in one area for so long. Gonna get the dark brush. And again, the whole idea is to create a painting and not to create a perfect photographic rendition of the model. And that's a very delicate line to walk, a very delicate balance to keep, especially with portrait painting, because the viewer is much more quick to attack if if a portrait looks a little bit more different than the actual person. But the thing is, it's okay if something is different in your painting. Like if the nose is even a tiniest bit too long, or if the the eyes, maybe the eyes are too small or they're too wide or whatever. Like, it's okay if things vary a little bit or even a lot. It's all down to your individual message that you want to get across in your painting. Always remember, it's about the painting. Painting is about painting. And that is a very delicate balance, to be honest. It's a very, very delicate balance, to know how much you want to put in, how literal do you want to make your painting. And there's nothing wrong with perfectly photographic paintings or something like that. It's just not my taste. And everyone has their own taste. Everyone has their own aesthetic. I'm just trying to soften this edge here. I think that value needs to get a little darker. Right around here, the superciliary, but not that dark. So just combining the cadmium yellow deep and the cadmium red medium, some burnt umber. But again, that is a very delicate balance, because I think that if we dwell too much on trying to create a perfectly photographic rendition or a perfect image of the model, then I think that will deter us, I think, a little bit from wanting to paint portrait. Right now I'm just adding even more specificity to these planes. Just adding a softer transition to that shape. And of course, this line here needs to go, but I think that it still can get a little darker. So the Alizarin permanent, or the Alizarin crimson permanent, into this area here with some of the cadmium red. Just gonna use the shadow color to soften these areas a little bit. And I'm gonna move my way down to here. I still think that this could get a little more specific now. So we're seeing a little bit more, but very, very subtle. We're seeing a little bit more of this side of the nose than this side, but it's very tiny, almost imperceptible. And that's what makes this angle so difficult. And again, I am pushing the dark a little bit, adding a little bit more contrast to the painting. Letting each brushstroke tell a little story. Again, I like to create visual poetry with these paintings now. I don't really want to make too much of, a perfect... I don't want to perfectly paint in anything. I really want it to be kind of... I want the viewer to get the feeling of, relaxation among these shapes. Softening down here. There's a very soft shadow over here. So again, I'm going to continue to revisit these darks. I think that, let's see here, I think I can push this still a little darker. Alright, so now that we're working our way down towards here again, I tend to do laps, I've noticed. So I start off here, go down, go back up, go back down, go back up, go back down, and I keep adding more specificity that way. But now that we're back down towards here again, I think we can start to put in some more information for the neck. Gonna soften down here. Gonna use the fan brush, and then as I soften this edge, that edge I can see already needs some attention. So I'm gonna soften this edge. It's kind of an intermediate value. And then to get rid of that glare, I'm gonna use the fan brush. All right, so I'm gonna need to figure out how much stuff I want to put in for the shadow. So that's too light, so I'm gonna get some burnt umber. I think this was the brush that I used to basically to charge the palette with first. So I think that value is okay. So that's going to be for the shadow on the neck. And I tend to relate the shoulder to the chin. So somewhat like that. So let's see. Let's make it even darker. More burnt umber. Sap green. That ought to be good. Let's get the shape of the shadow going all the way down towards the clavicle. And in the center, we have the suprasternal notch right over here. But I think that I'm just going to follow this shadow. A little bit more Alizarin permanent. I'm just going to look at the shape of the shadow itself. So it goes down and then over. Okay, so down here and then over that way. Then it goes kind of flat over here, then starts to go up again. And then I think we'll start to put in some of the flesh tone over here, and then maybe just suggest some of the, some of the stuff for the clothing that the model is wearing. So cadmium green. Cadmium green and cadmium red actually make a pretty nice color, a flesh color, which you wouldn't really expect, mixing complementary colors, but they actually do make very nice flesh tones. A little bit more titanium white, just to raise the light a little bit more. Let's just drop down in value, put in some more of the sap green. Just soften those edges by letting the brush strokes by letting the shapes kind of caress one another. Move that up. Alright, so let's start to put in some information for the clothing that the model's wearing. So I'm going to start with ultramarine blue. I'm going to mix right into the area where I painted in the background color. I'm going to add a little bit of Neo McGilt to this. Alright, so let's see here. I think I need to go back to the shadow color. Going back and forth between these brushes here. Alright, So I'm going to try to get the brush strokes to do most of the work for me. So pushing this down and over. And again, remember, it doesn't have to be just like the photograph. Now this would be a good instance, or a great instance, to have like a phthalo blue. I don't have phthalo blue on my palette right now, so just a few little dark shapes in there. Just trying to fill in the little gaps of the canvas there. Then I'm going to go back in with the flesh tone brush. Kind of fill them in. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean off this brush a little bit with the odorless mineral spirits. Just a little bit off camera here. Okay, so the ultramarine blue, I'm just going to put it straight onto the canvas here. Just because I want a very strong blue. I don't want to do too much for the clothing, but I'll show you why I'm putting straight blue in here in a second. A little bit more of an angle here. Alright, so I put in straight blue so I could mix right onto the palette, onto the painting, sorry, and get basically the brightest blue that I could possibly get. Gonna throw in some cadmium green. And I'm mixing right on the painting because I want the brightest color I can get. Some more cadmium green. And yes, I know that's a little bit more, it's a little more blue in the picture, but yeah, we're just changing it. It'll be okay. Definitely need to get some phthalo blue. Although I'm not sure I would use phthalo blue in the flesh tones, to be honest. Just for areas like this where you would want a very bright blue. We can kind of abbreviate as much as we want with the clothing. I think I'm just going to make this lighter here so these darks can look darker. Alright, now we're going to clean off these brushes yet again. And I'm going to put them off to the side, and I'm going to actually transition into some smaller brushes. So you can see how we're going to kind of make the progression from the larger brushes to what these would be considered, I guess, the middle. And now we're going to get the really, really small brushes out. And just like we had before, we're going to have a light brush, which will be this one, a middle tone brush, and a dark brush. And now we're going to add yet even more smaller shapes. And the idea is to, again, not try to make something like a perfectly photographic rendition, no perfect photographic aesthetic here. What I want is to just observe each and every little shape and start to kind of close in on the forms. But I am going to be, working the outside shape as well. So you will see me moving back and forth between the, the outer contour, the outer contours, and then the smaller shape. So for instance, that angle that you're seeing there just isn't going to work anymore. So I try to get it even more specific. And now again, it's a really fine line, to be honest, between trying to get it exactly like what you're looking at and then trying to visually interpret. It's a very fine line. So I think that I'm going to use the little middle tone brush that I have established to again add even more specificity to this shape. I keep putting things in and then taking them out. So that would be called noodling. I think that's what they called it when I was at Studio in Caminati. Well, to be honest, I think it was just one person that said that word, and it kind of stuck with me. So noodling is when you're kind of going back and forth, putting something in, taking it out. That's certainly going to be the case with the eyes. And again, I think I had this shape before, but it was, I guess, a little bit off. And so now I'm putting it back in. And I'm talking about the bottom, the lower eyelid. Now I'm going to use the light brush with a little bit of the background color and some of the flesh tone. Start to put more specificity into this. And it's important to observe what this looks like at a distance. It's very easy to make a mark and then, get attached to it. But I will say, with the eyes, I think the eyes have been the difficult part here for me. And I think that what I need is just to add much more refinement to the structures. So that is, like the accent for the upper eyelid. Start to put that in now. And remember, each time we add in something new, it always takes some time to sit in. It always takes some time for us to take it in. And that does in itself, of course, always create another awkward stage. Just kind of soften this edge. And I'm taking right from the palette. I'm barely doing any mixing here. And I'm trying to maintain the order between my brushes. That is the light brush, the middle brush, and the dark brush. And I think that it's important to to be able to switch gears between, you know, like putting in those large shapes, and then, as we mentioned earlier in this demonstration, you know, feeling your way around the portrait, but then knowing when to slow down and when to look at each shape at a time. And with the same brush, I'm going to just get a little bit of a middle tone. There is some light over here. Very little. That might have been too much. So let's see if I can get the middle tone brush. Just kind of shovel the paint up there. Might want to do the same thing over here. Also helps to create another gradation down here. And while we're at it, I think that, let's see here with the, I'm going to have to switch brushes again to a darker brush. I actually just added a darker tone onto this brush. It did have a lighter color before. It seems to be the only brush, or small brush, that is able to make a sustainable mark. So right here, I'm going to have to put much more specificity into that. Whereas right now, it's just a simple little line. It's going to need to have some more nuance to it. So it gets a little wider out here. Pay attention to where the nasal bone is. Nasal bone is pretty much indicated right there with the highlight. Let's see if I can bring back the highlight. And I don't want to get too crazy with the highlights, so I'm actually going to go ahead and unify that shape. So with the titanium white and the cadmium red. A lot of this is problem solving. And knowing what kind of look you're after with your painting. Now again, I'm going to revisit the shadow. This shape here is again in question. And that's the consequence of just taking right from the palette. I'm going to have to remix that. Basically the burnt umber, alizarin permanent, ivory black. This cuts in a little bit more. I think I might be showing too much out here on the side of the face, but first, let's get the fan brush. Eliminate that glare. Pick up one of the brushes I just cleaned earlier. I think I just need a little bit more of a halftone here. And now I'm really in problem solving mode. So yeah, that's what makes this demonstration a little more difficult, because I am showing you everything. So even the things that I don't know, I'm trying to explain to you, which can be kind of peculiar. So rather than explaining to you how I'm doing things right now, since I'm kind of in a problem-solving mode, I'm just going to explain what's going on with the portrait and how I'm going to deal with it. So right around here, I'm noticing that this the shadow appears different, and just that's it. It appears different to me. So I'm also trying to decide how close do I want the painting to get to the the contours and such of the photo reference. I have to make that decision in my mind. I have to make up my mind how close do I want these shapes to get to the photo reference. Don't want it to get too close, but at the same time I don't want to make I don't want to make her jaw wider than it actually is in the picture. A little bit of alizarin, ivory black, to emphasize that little accent. This is the accent I'm talking about. Alright, so I'm going to get the background brush. This is the shape in question. Now just by feel, I feel like I need to push this shape in. It's a little bit more blue there, but that's alright. I think that's just me taking some of the shape from the clothing. I get the halftone brush in the middle tone region of the palette. I did admittingly put a little bit of the alizarin crimson permanent into here.